Long before the blade of the guillotine ever gleamed above her head, Marie Antoinette suffered a far more insidious execution, one not of the body, but of the spirit. The fall of the French queen was not a single moment of violence, but a long, deliberate unraveling. Piece by piece, her identity was dismantled, her titles stripped, her friends torn away, her motherhood mocked, and her humanity denied. Her descent from the gilded halls of Versailles to the rough wooden cart that carried her through the screaming streets of Paris was no mere punishment. It was theater, a performance crafted to turn a queen into a monster, and a woman into a symbol of everything France wanted to destroy. And yet, even as the world jeered, something extraordinary happened. In the final hours of her life, barefoot, shorn, and shamed, she found a quiet strength. Her poise, her calm defiance, her refusal to beg, all became her final act of rebellion. So let me ask you, if the world turned against you, stripping away your name, your identity, your worth, would you still find the strength to stand tall? And where in the world are you watching this story from right now? Forget the shimmering chandeliers of Versailles. Our story begins not in a palace, but in a damp, foul-smelling prison cell, the conciergerie, a grim fortress ominously known as the antechamber to the guillotine. By August 2nd, 1793, the fallen queen had already endured months of imprisonment with her family, stripped of her jewels, her throne, and her identity. That night, guards came for her again. They tore her away from her sister-in-law and her children, dragging her alone into a cold, dimly lit chamber that would confine her for the next 76 days. Inside these stone walls, she ceased to be Her Majesty. She became merely prisoner number 280. The space was pitifully small and damp, its walls seeping moisture. Her bed, a straw-stuffed mattress, was barely more than a pile of filth. Privacy was a luxury she no longer had. 2 guards were stationed in her cell day and night, their gaze fixed upon her every move. They watched her eat. They watched her undress behind a flimsy curtain. They watched her try and fail to sleep. This wasn't just surveillance. It was psychological dissection, a methodical reminder that the woman who once ruled France could no longer even claim the right to turn her back unseen. The physical misery was relentless, but what truly broke her was not the cold or the hunger. It was the loss of her children. Just a month earlier, soldiers had stormed into her room in the dead of night to take away her 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. Witnesses recalled how she threw herself between them, screaming and pleading for mercy. Her daughter, Marie-Therese, clung desperately to her brother, sobbing, but nothing could stop them. They dragged the boy away, and she would never see him alive again. All she had left of him was a tiny portrait and a lock of his hair, hidden close to her heart beneath her corset. Losing her crown had wounded her pride. Losing her son shattered her soul. Her loyal maid, Rosalie Lamerlier, who stayed by her through every hour of those final months, later said that the queen's heart broke only when she spoke of her children. Every insult, every humiliation, every deprivation she endured afterward seemed to pale beside that grief. By mid-October, the end of her torment drew near. On October 14, 1793, Marie Antoinette was hauled before the Revolutionary Tribunal. This was no trial, it was theater, a spectacle written by her enemies, designed to annihilate her character in public. Unlike her husband, King Louis XVI, who had been given time to prepare a defense, Marie was granted less than a single day. The accusations were absurd, a twisted mix of politics and perverse imagination, drawn from years of slanderous pamphlets. They accused her of conspiring with Austria, of plotting massacres, even of hosting obscene orgies within the walls of Versailles. And then came the vilest charge of all, one meant to stain her forever: incest with her own son. The young Louis Charles had been coerced into signing a statement against her. As the words echoed through the courtroom, the air grew still. The chief prosecutor, Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville, practically glowed with malice. For a moment, Marie Antoinette said nothing. The silence stretched like a blade between her and her accusers. Then she rose, not to beg, not to defend, but to face the monstrous lie head-on. Her voice did not tremble. She turned to the gallery, locking eyes with the women of Paris who once screamed for her death. And in that bold, simple act, she reclaimed something the revolution could not take, her humanity. Her words were few, but her meaning thundered. I appeal to every mother here. In that instant, the crowd wavered. For the first time, they saw not a villainess, but a mother betrayed, humiliated, yet unbroken. 2 days later, on October 16th, the verdict was delivered. Guilty of high treason. The sentence, death by guillotine. When asked for a final statement, Marie Antoinette merely shook her head. Back in her cell, she refused her last meal. Calmly, she told Rosalie, I need nothing more, my child. It is finished. That night, she wrote a final letter to her sister-in-law. A farewell filled with sorrow and forgiveness. She begged that her son be absolved for the lies forced from his lips. The letter never reached its destination. It was intercepted and hidden away, only to be found years later. As dawn broke, her final humiliation was arranged with chilling precision. Guards ordered her to strip away the black mourning dress she had worn since the king's death, the last symbol of her royal identity. In its place, they forced her into a coarse white chemise, the garb of the condemned. Not a queen, but a penitent. Even then, she had to ask permission for a moment's privacy just to change her clothes. When her captors ignored her pleas, Marie Antoinette did something quietly powerful. She refused to obey right away. In a day carefully designed to strip her of all control, this small hesitation was her final act of autonomy. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, and his assistants took every opportunity to dehumanize her further. One of them seized her hair, once a shimmering blonde, now prematurely white from grief and sleepless nights, and crudely hacked it off with dull scissors. The act was both symbolic and practical, a cruel erasure of her femininity and rank, preparing her for the blade. Her hands were then bound tightly behind her back, the ropes biting so deep into her wrists that they drew pain with every movement. Even the simplest human needs now required permission she was forced to ask for meekly. When the guards finally led her outside, she was placed not in a covered carriage like her husband had been, but in an open wooden cart, the kind used for the lowest of criminals. As it began its slow, rattling journey through Paris, she became the centerpiece of a macabre parade. Tens of thousands lined the streets, jeering, laughing, and hurling insults as the cart rolled toward the Place de la Revolution. Unlike Louis XVI, who had faced a quiet, almost solemn procession, her hour-long ride was designed to break her completely, a public theater of humiliation meant to reduce a queen to nothing more than a spectacle. And yet, sitting on that rough plank of wood, her hands tied, her back straight, Marie Antoinette endured. Every scream, every curse hurled at her was a test of spirit, and she passed each one in silence. She remained still, composed, her chin lifted not in arrogance, but in unspoken defiance. She understood something profound in that moment. These final hours, not her years on the throne, would be what truly defined her legacy. The Queen of France had lost her jewels, her crown, her children, and her freedom, but what grew in their absence was something her enemies could never touch: quiet, unshakable dignity. Her silent composure during that long, torturous ride foretold the extraordinary courage she was about to display in her final minutes. The crowd's energy was volatile, a swirling chaos of rage, satisfaction, and curiosity. Some shouted with hatred, others spat, while a few simply watched in stunned silence. But through it all, Marie Antoinette sat like a statue carved from grace and sorrow, absorbing every blow to her humanity without a single word of surrender. The revolutionaries had wanted this moment to symbolize their triumph over monarchy. a complete annihilation of the old world. But what they created instead was something timeless. The image of a fallen queen who refused to be broken. That hour-long procession through the pulsing heart of Paris, meant to dehumanize her, ended up immortalizing her for the very opposite reason. Her grace, her restraint, and the haunting strength she carried to the very end. By the time the cart reached the Place de la Révolution, she had endured more than any woman could be expected to survive. But as the guillotine's tall wooden frame rose into view, its blade glinting against the gray October sky, she knew there was one last ordeal to face, the final test of composure, courage, and humanity. The crowd swelled around her like a living sea, tens of thousands pressing forward, hungry to witness the fall of the woman they had once called Madame Deficit. Their shouts were deafening, a mixture of triumph and bloodlust. The guillotine loomed above them all, silent and patient, like a predator waiting to strike. And then the cart came to a halt. Marie Antoinette, stripped of every luxury, every title, every remnant of her old life, did not break. Witnesses would later recall that she stepped down from the cart with quiet poise, her hands still bound, her hair crudely shorn, her gown a tattered remnant of former splendor. There was no panic, no trembling. Even the venomous insults thrown at her seemed to dissolve in the air before reaching her. At the base of the scaffold, she faced the final ascent, the wooden steps leading to the blade. Any other person might have faltered, might have cried or begged. But she didn't. Refusing the executioner's offer of help, she began to climb alone. Each step was a declaration. You can take my life, but you will not take my dignity. And then, in a moment so striking it has echoed through centuries, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Sanson, startled, flinched. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat. Marie Antoinette, seconds away from death, looked up at him and softly said, "Forgive me, sir. I did not mean to." That simple phrase, gentle, courteous, utterly human, was her final act of defiance. It was not an apology of submission, but one of grace. A quiet reminder that even as they sought to turn her into an object, she remained a person, proud, composed, unbroken. At exactly 12:15 p.m., the blade fell. Swift, precise, irrevocable. The executioner's assistant lifted her head high for the crowd to see, and a roar erupted. "Vive la République! Long live the Republic!" Her body was thrown into a cart and buried in an unmarked grave. But history would not forget her, because though the guillotine claimed her body, it could never touch the calm defiance that defined her final breath. A queen's last, unshakable proof that dignity can outlive death. In death, they tried to strip her of everything, her crown, her identity, her very humanity, reducing the last queen of France to nothing more than a condemned criminal. They sought to erase her from history, as though Marie Antoinette had never existed at all. But history has a strange way of preserving what cruelty tries to destroy. Even after the guillotine fell, her story refused to fade into silence. One of the most haunting tales that followed her execution was that of a young artist, the woman who would one day be known as Madame Tussaud. She was summoned to take a death mask of the Queen's severed head, capturing forever the pale, tragic beauty that had once ruled over France. It was a chilling act, both a work of art and a morbid reminder of how fascination and horror could intertwine. Even in the final moments of a fallen monarch's story, it would take more than 2 decades for her final chapter to be written. After the monarchy's restoration in 1815, King Louis XVIII ordered the exhumation of his brother and sister-in-law's remains. Their clothing confirmed their identities, and for the first time since that brutal October day, their bodies were granted the dignity of a royal burial at the Basilica of Saint Denis, the resting place of France's kings and queens. At last, the woman who had been paraded through the streets in humiliation, mocked as a symbol of excess, and executed as a commoner, was laid to rest as a queen. The French Revolution had sought to destroy everything she represented: wealth, power, and privilege. They stripped her of her children, her freedom, her dignity, and finally her life. Yet, in doing so, they revealed something the world hadn't expected. A woman of profound endurance, quiet courage, and unshakable grace. Her final hours became a testament to inner strength. That soft apology to her executioner, the calm composure she held as thousands jeered, the refusal to collapse or cry out. All of it showed that even when every shred of power was taken from her, she still controlled one thing, her narrative. They could take her throne, her jewels, even her name, but not her poise. Not the quiet strength that lingered until the very end. The guillotine may have been swift, merciless, and final, but it failed to cut her story from the fabric of history. Artists' sketches, eyewitness accounts, and later biographies ensured that Marie Antoinette would never be forgotten. What endured was not the caricature of a heartless queen, but the image of a mother, a prisoner, and a woman meeting death with dignity. Centuries later, her legacy still stirs the hearts of millions, not for her luxury, nor her tragic end, but for the grace with which she met the unimaginable. The world watched her humiliation, her fear, her pain. Yet in those moments, it also witnessed something far greater, a quiet defiance, a refusal to let cruelty define her final breath. That soft, almost whispered apology, "Forgive me, sir, I didn't mean to," has echoed through the ages. It wasn't just a gesture of courtesy. It was a profound statement of strength. Even standing on the edge of death, Marie Antoinette held onto her humanity, her dignity, and her poise. Her story isn't merely one of opulence and downfall. It's one of resilience, grace, and inner power. When stripped of everything, her crown, her freedom, her title, she still stood tall, reminding the world that true royalty lies not in status, but in spirit. Every insult hurled at her only revealed how unbreakable she truly was. Even as the blade descended, her legacy rose beyond reach, timeless, untouchable, eternal. The revolution took her life, yes, but it could never erase her humanity. She may have died as they intended, yet she lives forever in history as they never could have foreseen. A queen without a crown, yet utterly unbroken. And now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you see Marie Antoinette as a tragic figure, or as a symbol of unwavering grace in the face of destruction? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Vassal Truths, where history's forgotten voices are brought back to life. Stay curious, stay inspired, and never stop seeking the truth beneath the crown.